This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chet Chris, London, UK. Nicholas Nickleby, by Charles Dickens. Chapter 26. Is fraught with some danger to Miss Nickleby's peace of mind. The place was a handsome suite of private apartments in Regent Street. The time was 3 o'clock in the afternoon to the dull and plodding, and the first hour of morning to the gay and spirited. The persons were Lord Frederick Verisopht and his friend Sir Mulberry Hawk. These distinguished gentlemen were reclining listlessly on a couple of sofas, with a table between them, on which were scattered in rich confusion the materials of an untasted breakfast. Newspapers lay strewn about the room, but these, like the meal, were neglected and unnoticed. Not, however, because any flow of conversation prevented the attractions of the journals from being called into request, for not a word was exchanged between the two, nor was any sound uttered, save when one, in tossing about to find an easier resting place for his aching head, uttered an exclamation of impatience, and seemed for a moment to communicate a new restlessness to his companion. These appearances would in themselves have furnished a pretty strong clue to the extent of the debauch of the previous night, even if there had not been other indications of the amusements in which it had been passed. A couple of billiard balls, all mud and dirt, 2 battered hats, a champagne bottle with a soiled glove twisted round the neck to allow of its being grasped more surely in its capacity of an offensive weapon, a broken cane, a card case without the top, an empty purse, a watch guard snapped asunder, a handful of silver mingled with fragments of half-smoked cigars and their stale and crumbled ashes. These, and many other tokens of riot and disorder, hinted very intelligibly at the nature of last night's gentlemanly frolics. Lord Frederick Verisopht was the first to speak. Dropping his slippered foot on the ground, and yawning heavily, he struggled into a sitting posture, and turned his dull languid eyes towards his friend, to whom he called in a drowsy voice. "Hallo!" replied Sir Mulberry, turning round. "Are we going to lie here all day?" said the lord. "I don't know that we're fit for anything else," replied Sir Mulberry, "yet awhile at least. I haven't a grain of life in me this morning." "Life!" cried Lord Verisopht. "I feel as if there would be nothing so snug and comfortable as to die at once." "Then why don't you die?" said Sir Mulberry. With which inquiry he turned his face away, and seemed to occupy himself in an attempt to fall asleep. His hopeful friend and pupil drew a chair to the breakfast table, and essayed to eat, but finding that impossible, lounged to the window, then loitered up and down the room with his hand to his fevered head, and finally threw himself again on his sofa, and roused his friend once more. "What the devil's the matter?" groaned Sir Mulberry, sitting upright on the couch. Although Sir Mulberry said this with sufficient ill humour, he did not seem to feel himself quite at liberty to remain silent, for, after stretching himself very often, and declaring with a shiver that it was infernal cold, he made an experiment at the breakfast table, and, proving more successful in it than his less seasoned friend, remained there. "Suppose," said Sir Mulberry, pausing with a morsel on the point of his fork, "suppose we go back to the subject of little Nickleby, eh?" "Which little Nickleby? The moneylender or the gal?" asked Lord Verisopht. "You take me, I see," replied Sir Mulberry. "The girl, of course." "You promised me you'd find her out," said Lord Verisopht. "So I did," rejoined his friend, "but I've thought further of the matter since then. You distrust me in the business. You shall find her out yourself." "Nay," remonstrated Lord Verisopht. "But I say yes," returned his friend. "You shall find her out yourself. Don't think that I mean when you can. I know as well as you that if I did, you could never get sight of her without me. No, I say you shall find her out. Shall. And I'll put you in the way. Now, curse me if you ain't a real deyvlish, downright, thorough-paced friend," said the young lord, on whom this speech had produced a most reviving effect. "I'll tell you how," said Sir Mulberry. "She was at that dinner as a bait for you." "No!" cried the young lord. "What the as a bait for you," repeated his friend. "Old Nickleby told me so himself." "What a fine old cock it is!" exclaimed Lord Verisopht. "A noble rascal!" "Yes," said Sir Mulberry. "He knew she was a smart little creature." "Smart!" interposed the young lord. "'Pon my soul, Hawk, she's a perfect beauty, a picture, a statue, upon my soul she is." "Well," replied Sir Mulberry, shrugging his shoulders, and manifesting an indifference whether he felt it or not, "that's a matter of taste. If mine doesn't agree with yours, so much the better." "Confound it!" reasoned the lord. "You were thick enough with her that day, anyhow. I could hardly get in a word." "Well enough for once, well enough for once," replied Sir Mulberry, "but not worth the trouble of being agreeable to again. If you seriously want to follow up the niece, tell the uncle that you must know where she lives, and how she lives, and with whom, or you're no longer a customer of his. He'll tell you fast enough." "Why didn't you say this before?" asked Lord Verisopht, "instead of letting me go on burning, consuming, dragging out a miserable existence for an age?" "I didn't know it, in the first place," answered Sir Mulberry, carelessly; "and in the second, I didn't believe you were so very much in earnest." Now, the truth was, that in the interval which had elapsed since the dinner at Ralph Nickleby's, Sir Mulberry Hawk had been furtively trying by every means in his power to discover whence Kate had so suddenly appeared, and whither she had disappeared. Unassisted by Ralph, however, with whom he had held no communication since their angry parting on that occasion, all his efforts were wholly unavailing, and he had therefore arrived at the determination of communicating to the young lord the substance of the admission he had gleaned from that worthy. To this he was impelled by various considerations, among which the certainty of knowing whatever the weak young man knew was decidedly not the least, as the desire of encountering the usurer's niece again, and using his utmost arts to reduce her pride, and revenge himself for her contempt, was uppermost in his thoughts. It was a politic course of proceeding, and one which could not fail to redound to his advantage in every point of view, since the very circumstance of his having extorted from Ralph Nickleby his real design in introducing his niece to such society, coupled with his extreme disinterestedness in communicating it so freely to his friend, could not but advance his interests in that quarter, and greatly facilitate the passage of coin, pretty frequent and speedy already, from the pockets of Lord Frederick Verisopht to those of Sir Mulberry Hawk. Thus reasoned Sir Mulberry, and in pursuance of this reasoning, he and his friend soon afterwards repaired to Ralph Nickleby's, there to execute a plan of operations concerted by Sir Mulberry himself, avowedly to promote his friend's object, and really to attain his own. They found Ralph at home, and alone. As he led them into the drawing room, the recollection of the scene which had taken place there seemed to occur to him, for he cast a curious look at Sir Mulberry, who bestowed upon it no other acknowledgment than a careless smile. They had a short conference upon some money matters then in progress, which was scarcely disposed of when the lordly dupe, in pursuance of his friend's instructions, requested with some embarrassment to speak to Ralph alone. "Alone, eh?" cried Sir Mulberry, affecting surprise. "Oh, very good. I'll walk into the next room here."